We were married for 32 years with no kids, and my dying husband left all 6 of our homes to his mistress. I simply smiled and said, "There's something I never told you," and he passed away seconds later. Eric's sudden emergency heart landing last week landed him in the ICU on full-time monitoring, and after 32 years of childless marriage, I knew every hidden lie he had buried was finally about to surface. Listen y'all, I'm Dana, and I have spent my entire adult life building stability while my husband coasted off my hard work. We married young, straight out of community college, with no family money backing us and no safety net to fall back on. The only difference between us from day one was simple. I planned for the future, and he lived strictly for temporary pleasure and instant gratification. Before I ever walked down the aisle, my parents set up an ironclad premarital trust in my name only. It was a small but smart inheritance from my maternal grandparents, designed to protect me in case marriage didn't pan out. Back then, I thought it was overly cautious. I believed we would build our life together, side by side, equally invested in every asset we gained. I had no idea I would end up funding our entire real estate portfolio alone for 3 decades. Through my late 20s, 30s, and 40s, I climbed the corporate ladder in commercial real estate asset management. I worked overtime weekends, took on high-pressure client accounts, and steadily grew the value of my trust fund through careful market investments and rental property purchases. Every single house we owned, all 6 residential properties scattered across 3 neighboring suburbs, came straight from my trust disbursements and my personal work bonuses. Let me make this crystal clear, Eric never contributed a single cent to any down payment, monthly mortgage, property tax bill, or emergency home repair. He worked basic retail management jobs his whole career, barely covering his own personal spending, car payments, and occasional travel. His paychecks never once touched our real estate expenses, not one receipt, not one bank transfer, not one recorded contribution in 32 years. Here is the thing no one understands about our marriage: we lived comfortably, but we never lived flashy. Our friends and distant family always assumed our 6 rental homes and primary residence were joint marital assets. Even Eric believed that lie. He watched me handle every financial document, every closing disclosure, every monthly autopay setup, and never once bothered to ask how the money actually flowed. He just assumed half of everything was legally his. I found out about Angela 10 years ago, purely by accident. I was sorting old bank statements for tax filing season, going through years of organized financial records like I did every spring, when I noticed consistent weekly cash withdrawals and unexplained Venmo transfers to an unknown name. Small amounts at first, then larger holiday bonuses, random jewelry store charges, and weekend hotel stays he had claimed were work retreats. I didn't confront him that day. I didn't cry, didn't argue, and didn't blow up his phone demanding answers. After 20 years of building our home and our reputation, I knew an emotional fight would only leave me vulnerable. If I filed for divorce in the heat of anger, state marital property laws could muddy the lines of my trust assets, and I could lose portions of properties I had built entirely on my own. So I did the opposite. I stayed calm. I doubled down on my documentation habits. I saved every single bank record, every trust fund disbursement statement, every closing document, every tax filing, and every receipt proving sole financial responsibility. I created a locked digital folder and a physical file cabinet exclusively for my property proof, updated monthly without fail. I also started quietly observing his patterns. He would leave late at night claiming friend emergencies, take random weekday afternoons off, and hide his phone screen whenever I walked into the room. He grew increasingly distant, less affectionate, and more irritable with small household requests. He started resenting my structured financial habits, mocking me for being too rigid, too obsessed with paperwork, and too focused on growing our assets. It took me 6 months of quiet observation to confirm Angela was a long-term co-worker, from his retail corporate office. Their affair wasn't a one-time mistake or a drunken fling. It was a decade-long emotional and physical relationship he had maintained right under my roof, all while living in homes I paid for entirely. What hurt most wasn't just the cheating, it was the entitlement. Eric lived in my properties, enjoyed the passive rental income one generated, benefited from the stable credit and property equity I built, and still chose to invest his extra time, money, and affection into another woman. He never thanked me for our comfortable life, he just felt like he was owed half of everything I had earned. As the years passed, his health started declining fast. He developed chronic hypertension, severe coronary artery disease, and constant heart arrhythmia. His doctor warned him repeatedly about stress, overexertion, and emotional spikes. I watched his condition worsen season by season, knowing his days were numbered. Still, I kept all my proof organized, waiting patiently for the day he would reveal his true final intentions. I never once hinted at my knowledge of the affair, I never mentioned the trust fund specifics, and I never corrected his casual comments about our houses or our shared investments. I let him live in his delusion that our 32-year marriage gave him legal rights to my sole assets. 2 weeks ago, his condition crashed. He suffered a massive cardiac arrest at home, and paramedics rushed him to the regional hospital. He coded twice in the ER before stabilizing in the ICU. His attending doctor, Patrick, told me straight that his heart was permanently damaged, and any severe emotional shock or sudden spike in adrenaline could end his life instantly. Instead of being humbled by his near-death experience, Eric grew bitter and defiant. Confined to his hospital bed, unable to work, unable to travel, and unable to maintain his secret meetings, he grew obsessed with securing a future for Angela. He started muttering about final arrangements and leaving something behind for the woman he had loved for a decade. 3 days ago, he demanded an official bedside will reading. He refused to wait for hospital discharge and refused to finalize documents privately with his lawyer. He insisted on a formal witness session, specifically requesting my presence, along with my best friend Sydney and my estate attorney Chase. He even personally called Angela and told her to be there for the big reveal. I knew exactly what he was planning. After 32 years of me building every piece of our wealth, and after a decade of cheating and lying, he was moments away from gifting my entire life's work to his mistress. I packed my locked file folder of certified legal documents, kept my composure completely neutral, and prepared to watch his delusional world crumble. The hospital room was quiet and sterile the morning before the reading. Beeping monitors tracked his fragile vitals, 4 lines ran into his arms, and his skin looked pale and frail. He looked every bit the dying man. Yet behind his tired eyes, there was a sharp, smug confidence. He truly believed he had full authority to rewrite my legacy however he pleased. I sat in the visitor chair beside his bed, calm and steady on the surface, while every unspoken betrayal of the past decade weighed quietly in my chest. After years of waiting, the final confrontation I had prepared for was finally about to begin. It didn't take long for the small hospital room to fill up with tension and unspoken agendas. The morning light filtered through the narrow ICU windows, soft and muted, but the energy in that space was anything but calm. Every person who walked through that door had a role to play in the final breakdown of my 32-year marriage. Listen y'all, I had spent 10 years imagining this moment, not in a vengeful, screaming way, but in a quiet, prepared way. I had watched Eric lie, cheat, and leech off my work for a decade, all while growing bolder in his sense of entitlement. He truly thought he had gotten away with everything, and today was his chance to reward his mistress at my expense. My best friend Sydney arrived first. She has been in my life since high school, watched me build my career from the ground up, sat with me through every late-night work shift, every real estate closing, and every stressful tax season. She is the only person who knew the full truth of our finances. She saw every dollar I poured into our properties and every dollar Eric refused to contribute. She sat beside me in the visitor chair, squeezed my hand once, and didn't say a word. She knew I didn't need comfort, I needed witnesses. My estate attorney Chase showed up next, carrying a slim professional briefcase. He has handled my trust amendments, property registrations, and asset protection planning for years. He knew exactly why Eric had demanded this will reading, and he knew what Eric was about to try and steal. He nodded at me silently, took a standing position near the back wall, and waited for the room to settle. The last person to walk in was Angela. She didn't step in with shame or hesitation. She walked into that hospital room like she owned the place, dressed polished and confident, carrying a small designer bag with her head held high. She didn't glance at me and didn't acknowledge Sydney or Chase. Her eyes locked straight on Eric's hospital bed, soft and sympathetic, playing the role of the devoted secret partner perfectly. It was disgusting to watch. She had spent a decade benefiting from my husband's affection, my husband's cash gifts, and my hard-earned lifestyle. She had enjoyed dinners, vacations, and luxury items funded entirely by my real estate income. Yet she stood there acting like she was the one who had stayed loyal and supportive through his declining health. Eric's entire demeanor shifted the second she walked in. His pale face perked up, his tired eyes lit up, and he lifted a shaky hand to gesture her closer. He didn't spare me a single glance. After 32 years of marriage, I was just background noise in his final love story. Dr. Patrick stayed in the room, as required hospital protocol. He monitored Eric's heart rate on the screen, adjusted his foredrip quietly, and kept a close eye on his vitals. He had already warned us all that Eric's cardiovascular system was extremely fragile, and any sudden emotional surge could trigger a fatal arrhythmia. Eric didn't care, he was too focused on his final power play. Once everyone was assembled, Eric cleared his throat weakly and took full control of the room. He spoke in a slow, raspy voice, making sure every single person heard every word. He said he had spent weeks drafting his final will, revising it carefully to reflect what he called fair and deserved distribution. He openly admitted he had kept a long-term relationship with Angela, said she had loved him faithfully through his worst health struggles, and claimed I had grown cold, distant, and obsessed only with money and property over the years. He painted me as the cruel, ungrateful wife and her as the compassionate partner, who had truly cared for him. I sat there and listened without a single reaction. I didn't roll my eyes, didn't shake my head, and didn't interrupt. I had expected this narrative. Cheating spouses always rewrite history to justify their betrayal, they minimize decades of loyalty and hard work to make their selfish choices feel righteous. Then Eric asked Chase to read the official will aloud. Chase hesitated for a split second, glanced at me, and I gave him a tiny, almost unnoticeable nod. I was ready to hear every word. Chase began reading the document in a steady, professional tone. The terms were clear, blunt, and unbelievably bold. Eric formally bequeathed his entire estate, including all 6 residential properties, all rental equity, all residual savings, and all property-related assets directly to Angela. He named her the sole and exclusive beneficiary of every single home I had ever purchased. He left me absolutely nothing, no spousal provision, no residual inheritance, no personal property allowance. After 32 years of marriage, he erased me entirely from his final legacy and handed my life's work to the woman he had cheated with for a decade. The second the final sentence of the will left Chase's mouth, Angela's entire demeanor changed. The soft, sympathetic act vanished instantly. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. She stood a little taller, tilted her chin up, and glanced directly at me for the first time since walking into the room. Her eyes were filled with pure arrogance and victory. She thought she had won. She thought she was about to walk away with 6 fully paid-off homes, years of rental equity, and a stable real estate portfolio worth well over $1 million. She thought my 32 years of sacrifice and discipline were now hers to claim. Sydney tightened her grip on my hand, her expression tight with suppressed anger. She knew how much those properties meant to me. She knew every late night, every risky investment call, and every careful budget choice that built that portfolio. It was all mine, and we both watched a dying man try to give it all away to a stranger. The room fell thick with silence. The only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor, the quiet hum of hospital equipment, and Eric's shallow breathing. Everyone waited for my reaction. They expected tears, screaming, outrage, or devastation. They expected the betrayed wife to fall apart in front of them. Eric looked over at me finally, his eyes sharp and challenging. He wanted to see me break. He wanted to leave this world knowing he had hurt me one last time, and that he had stripped me of everything I had built to reward his mistress. He wanted to die feeling powerful, and he wanted to watch me feel powerless. But I didn't break down. I didn't frown, didn't cry, and didn't argue. I simply smiled, calm and unrushed, and shifted forward slightly in my chair. I locked eyes with my dying husband, and I could see his confidence waver for just a split second. He hadn't prepared for me to be unfazed. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by witnesses, legal counsel, his triumphant mistress, and his attending doctor, I prepared to speak the truth that would unravel every last one of his delusions. That room was holding its breath, waiting for me to spiral. Angela's smug smile was locked in place, convinced she had just secured a lifelong fortune off my husband's final wish. Eric's gaze bore into me, sharp and bitter, ready to feed on my pain. Even Sydney and Chase were quiet, letting me take the lead in a moment no one could prepare for me. Listen y'all, I had waited 10 years for this exact second, 10 years of quietly logging receipts, saving trust disclosures, and documenting every single financial move Eric never bothered to understand. I didn't stay silent out of weakness. I stayed silent because I wanted him to dig his own hole all the way to the bottom before I handed him the final truth. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady and soft, no yelling, no bitterness, just pure calm. I told Eric I wasn't upset, and I wasn't shocked. I said I had known about Angela for a decade, watched him drain small sums of cash, lie about his whereabouts, and treat my hard-earned assets like they were his free personal playground. I had let him believe whatever he wanted, because his delusions never hurt me legally, until he tried to hand my life's work to someone else. Eric's face faltered instantly. He had spent years lying so smoothly, he had started believing his own fake truth. He assumed I was oblivious, clueless, and too focused on work to notice his long-term affair. The realization that I had known everything this entire time hit him harder than any argument ever could. He tried to cut me off, his voice cracking with weak frustration from his hospital bed. He mumbled excuses, tried to deflect, said I was bitter and jealous, and claimed I was only lashing out because I had never loved him the way Angela did. I held up one hand, quiet and firm, and stopped his rambling cold. I told him there was one critical secret I had kept through our entire 32-year marriage, something he had never once taken the time to verify or research. Every single one of those 6 houses he had just willed away did not belong to our marriage. They never belonged to him, not even a fraction of equity, not a single legal claim. I watched his eyes go wide, confusion mixing with arrogance, as he tried to process my words. He opened his mouth to argue, spouting off what he thought was legal fact. He said we had acquired those homes during our marriage, and that everything purchased while married is joint marital property by default in our state. He truly believed he had every right to gift those homes to whoever he chose. That's when Chase stepped forward, finally breaking his silence. He unzipped his briefcase and spread an organized stack of certified legal documents across the small bedside tray table. The papers were official, court-filed, and fully notarized, every single one dated and recorded long before we ever exchanged marriage vows. Chase spoke in a clear, authoritative tone that left zero room for debate. He explained my grandparents' premarital trust was fully established and funded 5 years before I met Eric. All 6 property down payments came directly from trust principal disbursements. Every monthly mortgage autodraft, every annual property tax payment, and every repair invoice was exclusively withdrawn from my separate trust account, never any joint marital funds. He clarified state marital law plainly for everyone in the room: properties purchased entirely with verified premarital trust assets, with zero spousal contribution of any kind, remain the sole and separate property of the trust holder. Eric had never contributed labor, money, or credit to a single transaction. Legally, he had no ownership stake, no equitable claim, and absolutely no authority to write those homes into his will. The air in the room shifted completely. Angela's smug smile froze on her face, then slowly crumbled away. She stepped back half a step, her confident posture deflating instantly. The $1 million future she had been celebrating vanished in seconds, replaced by pure shock and embarrassment. She had spent years clinging to a married man, waiting for his inheritance, only to find out there was nothing for her to inherit. Eric's face drained of every last drop of color. His lips turned pale, his jaw went slack, and his breathing instantly turned rapid and shallow. He stared at the stack of documents like they were burning him, like the printed legal words were physically attacking him. For 32 years, he had lived under the delusion that he co-owned my empire. He had felt entitled to my success, resented my financial discipline, and cheated on me while leeching off my work. Now he realized he had been nothing more than a resident in homes I owned outright. A guest with zero rights, zero equity, and zero legacy to give away. Every judgment he had cast on my career, every complaint about my strict budgeting, and every arrogant assumption of joint ownership collapsed in a single moment. His heart monitor started beeping faster, the steady rhythm spiking into an erratic pattern. Dr. Patrick's head snapped toward the screen immediately. He rushed to the bedside, checking Eric's pulse and oxygen levels, his tone urgent and sharp. He warned Eric to calm down, to regulate his breathing, and reminded him that his heart was struggling to compensate for the sudden emotional shock. But Eric couldn't calm down. Shock, rage, humiliation, and crushing regret crashed over him all at once. He had betrayed his loyal wife for a decade, wasted his final days plotting to steal her assets, and embarrassed himself in front of every witness in the room. He had realized he was dying a fool, and he could feel his body shutting down from the trauma of that truth. He leaned back against the stark white hospital pillows, his fingers trembling as he tried to speak, his throat tight and gasping, but no coherent words came out. Standing just a few feet away, Angela remained frozen in place, her earlier smug pride completely shattered into dust. She didn't make a single move to comfort her dying lover, nor did she utter a word or dare to meet the eyes of anyone else in the room. She knew with absolute clarity that she had been thoroughly exposed as nothing more than a greedy opportunist, a woman with no legitimate claim, no legal standing, and no rightful place in that sterile room. Sydney leaned in closer to me, her voice barely a soft whisper, asking if I wanted to step outside and avoid the distressing scene. I shook my head gently, my stance unwavering. I had waited a decade for this final chapter to unfold, and I had no intention of walking away now. I needed to see every last lie he had constructed fall apart completely. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor grew impossibly fast and erratic, quickly escalating into a sharp, piercing alarm tone that filled the silent space. Dr. Patrick sprang into action on pure professional instinct, grabbing emergency crash cart equipment and moving rapidly to stabilize Eric's failing vitals. But deep down, everyone present knew it was far too late. The damage to his fragile system was instantaneous, catastrophic, and completely irreversible. After years of coping with chronic heart failure, his severely overstressed cardiovascular system finally gave out entirely under the crushing weight of his sudden emotional shock. In that quiet ICU room, Just seconds after the inescapable truth of his financial non-existence was laid bare, Eric's body stopped fighting. His chest stilled, the frantic look in his eyes went completely blank, and the monitor flatlined into a single, unbroken tone. The second that sharp monitor tone flatlined, the entire hospital room fell into a bone-chilling, suffocating silence. The steady, persistent beeping that had lingered in the background for weeks vanished completely, replaced by a heavy, hollow stillness that was broken only by the faint, muffled hum of distant hospital machinery echoing down the hallway. Listen y'all, I didn't cry. I didn't gasp, flinch, or feel even a microscopic ounce of grief swelling up in my chest. After 32 years of quiet betrayal, 10 years of meticulously documenting every single lie he hid behind my back, and watching him spend his absolute final hours on earth trying to ruin my life's work to enrich a woman who never truly cared about him, all I felt was a cold, unshakable relief. The long, exhausting, and emotionally draining chapter of my toxic marriage was finally over for good, ending exactly where his entitlement had led him. Dr. Patrick operated on pure medical protocol, immediately grabbing the defibrillator pads, checking Eric's unresponsive pupils, and frantically running through the standard emergency resuscitation procedures. He and the on-call nurse worked with rapid precision, applying chest compressions, administering emergency intravenous medication, and desperately attempting to jumpstart his motionless heart. But everyone standing in that room recognized the futility of the effort. The fatal cardiac shock had already wrought total, permanent destruction. After several long minutes of intense, fruitless effort, Dr. Patrick slowly stepped back from the bedside, lowered his hands, and shook his head with a heavy sigh. He checked the time on his watch, turned toward us with a somber tone, and officially pronounced Eric dead. Throughout the entire frantic medical effort, Angela never moved an inch. She stood rooted to the linoleum floor near the foot of the bed, her face a ghostly, drained white, her previous arrogant confidence entirely obliterated. All her grandiose dreams of inheriting 6 mortgage-free residential properties, living off my hard-earned commercial real estate wealth, and officially stepping into the spotlight as Eric's beloved partner, had evaporated in a matter of seconds. She wasn't grieving the loss of the man she had spent 10 years with, she was panicking, utterly terrified of walking out of that hospital room, with absolutely nothing to show for a decade of secret meetings and patient waiting. When she finally found her voice following the official pronouncement of death, it came out shaky, high-pitched, and desperately defensive. She tried to backtrack every single one of her unspoken claims, stammering frantically that she had only ever cared about Eric's physical well-being, insisting she had never cared about his money, his estate, or his houses. She claimed with trembling lips that she was merely a loyal, loving companion who had stood by him through his declining health, and that none of the chaos in the room was her fault. I turned to face her slowly, keeping my posture straight and my voice entirely calm and unrushed. I offered no screaming, no malice, and no hysterical insults, just plain, unvarnished honesty. I told her plainly that loyalty isn't sneaking around with a married man for a decade while his wife works overtime to build his entire lifestyle from scratch. Loyalty isn't showing up to a dying man's bedside like a vulture, eager to collect an inheritance you did absolutely nothing to earn or build. I made it crystal clear to her that she had spent 10 years benefiting from my sweat equity, my smart property investments, and my financially secure home, and she possessed zero right to play the innocent, heartbroken victim now that the truth had stripped her of her prize. Sydney stepped forward to stand right beside me, solid and unwavering, echoing every sentiment I expressed. Sydney had witnessed the endless sacrifices I made over 32 years, watching me skip vacations and work late nights while Eric spent his leisure time and pocket money on an illicit affair. She bluntly reminded Angela that she had no moral high ground left to stand on. Chase immediately shifted into full legal execution, cutting through Angela's flustered, rambling excuses with razor-sharp factual precision. He informed her directly that the will Eric had just demanded be read was completely null, void, and worthless regarding all real estate assets mentioned. Because Eric held precisely zero legal ownership equity in any of the 6 residential properties, he possessed no testamentary rights to assign, gift, or distribute them to anyone. Chase made sure she understood that the entire clause in the document granting her my properties was legally invalid, completely unenforceable, and would be immediately thrown out by any probate judge with a single glance at the trust filings. Furthermore, Chase issued a stern, formal warning: if she attempted to contest the estate, file fraudulent claims of spousal equity, or harass me for financial compensation, he would instantly file civil harassment charges and secure a formal court restraining order against her. She had no legal standing, no credible witnesses, and not a single shred of documentation to challenge my sole ownership. Angela's shoulders slumped in absolute, crushed defeat. She cast one final glance at Eric's lifeless body, though her eyes held no trace of genuine sorrow or love, only bitter, stinging disappointment. She had wasted 10 precious years of her life clinging to a married man, holding out for a fortune that had never actually existed outside of his own arrogant mind. She had utterly humiliated herself in front of an attorney, a physician, my best friend, and the wife she had tried to displace, leaving her with nowhere to turn and nothing to gain. Without uttering another word, she grabbed her designer purse, turned sharply on her heel, and practically fled from the hospital room. She didn't offer a single word of condolence, didn't apologize for her role in the deception, and didn't even grant a final glance to the man she claimed to adore. She simply ran, desperate to escape the suffocating shame of her failed scheme and the harsh reality of her empty hands. Once the door swung shut behind her, the heavy atmosphere in the room instantly transformed, feeling noticeably lighter, as if a toxic cloud that had hovered over us for years had finally dissipated. Dr. Patrick finished up his required administrative documentation regarding the time of death, quietly disconnected the silent monitoring equipment, and stepped out into the hallway to coordinate standard hospital procedures. That left only Sydney, Chase, and me remaining in the quiet space, standing in the presence of the empty shell of a man to whom I had devoted 32 years of my life. Chase gently walked me through the immediate legal steps that lay ahead, his tone steady and reassuring. He explained that the upcoming probate process would be remarkably simple and administrative. Armed with the complete, certified stack of premarital trust documents, original land deeds, and 32 years of bank records showing zero financial contribution from Eric, the probate judge would easily issue a summary judgment confirming my absolute, sole ownership of all 6 properties. There would be no lengthy trial, no messy disputes, and no legal loopholes for anyone to exploit. He also confirmed that because every single asset was securely locked inside my individual premarital trust, my portfolio was entirely insulated from any of Eric's outstanding credit card debts, medical bills, or final estate administration fees. I would not be held financially responsible for a single dime of his end-of-life expenses, adding a final, impenetrable layer of legal protection that my parents had envisioned for me decades ago. Sydney wrapped her arms around me in a warm, gentle hug, her voice filled with quiet pride. She told me I had navigated an unimaginable nightmare with more poise, dignity, and calculated grace than anyone she had ever known. She reminded me that I hadn't lost anything at all that day, rather, I had finally reclaimed every single fragment of my power, my identity, and my peace that I had spent 32 years holding back for a partner who never deserved my devotion. I stood quietly by the window for several minutes, looking out at the calm world outside, reflecting on the endless years I had spent second-guessing myself, wondering if I was too rigid with my accounting, too obsessed with property management, or too unyielding with my personal boundaries. I had spent decades ensuring our future was bulletproof, while the man lying in that hospital bed had spent a decade plotting to strip it all away from me. I had waited 10 long years for justice, not out of a petty desire for dramatic revenge, but out of a fundamental need for self-protection. I had never wished for Eric's death, nor had I ever hoped for his health to collapse so severely. All I had ever wanted was to safeguard the empire I had built with my own sweat and intellect, and to stop allowing an ungrateful, entitled spouse to leech off my hard work. In the end, it was his own unchecked greed, his bloated arrogance, and his profound betrayal that brought about his ultimate downfall. As I prepared to step out of that hospital room and return to a life where I was an independent, fully protected woman owning every single acre of my legacy, I knew with absolute certainty that the most painful era of my life was permanently over, and a brilliant, peaceful chapter was just beginning. Stepping out through the heavy glass doors of the regional hospital that afternoon felt entirely surreal, as if I were finally emerging from a dense, suffocating 32-year fog that I hadn't even fully realized was consuming me. The sky above was a brilliant, vibrant blue, the afternoon sun felt warm and soothing against my skin, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't carrying the subtle, exhausting anxiety of waiting for Eric's next lie, his next hidden expense, or his next selfish outburst. Listen y'all, society often expects us to believe that the end of a long-term marriage must always be accompanied by agonizing, debilitating grief, even when the relationship was inherently toxic. But real grief only exists when there was genuine love, mutual sacrifice, and shared respect to mourn. My marriage had long since devolved into a completely one-sided arrangement that I had sustained entirely on my own shoulders. I grieved none of it. I felt only an overwhelming, liberating sense of pure freedom. Over the next several weeks, my primary focus remained squarely on clearing up the final administrative and legal details. Chase filed the formal probate petitions immediately, attaching every notarized trust document, property closing statement, and financial record I had meticulously organized over the years. The court's review was remarkably swift and completely devoid of complications, unfolding precisely as Chase had outlined. The presiding judge thoroughly reviewed the premarital trust instruments, verified the 32-year paper trail showing zero financial input from Eric, and issued a decisive ruling confirming my sole, unassailable ownership of all 6 residential properties. The judge formally voided Eric's bedside will in its entirety regarding any real estate mentions, issuing a stern written declaration that the deceased possessed zero legal authority to bequeath or transfer assets that had never belonged to his marital estate. It was a flawless, airtight legal victory that permanently closed the door on any future challenges. Predictably, Angela did not fade away entirely without attempting one last petty, desperate ploy. Despite Chase's clear and severe warning at the hospital, she attempted to file a formal creditor's claim against Eric's tiny personal estate, arguing through a low-end attorney that she was legally entitled to financial compensation for a decade of unpaid emotional support and domestic partnership. She had the audacity to try to reframe her secret, 10-year affair as a dedicated, sacrificial service that warranted a massive payout from his assets. Chase dismantled her ridiculous claim within 48 hours flat. He submitted explicit sworn witness statements, documented evidence of the thousands of dollars in cash gifts Eric had secretly funneled to her from his personal spending money, and cited firm state legal precedents that explicitly forbid non-spousal romantic partners from claiming estate compensation. The judge dismissed her frivolous petition outright, penalizing her with court costs and leaving her completely empty-handed, saddled with legal fees on top of her shattered expectations. Furious and humiliated, she resorted to sending a barrage of desperate text messages and voicemail recordings to my phone. She started by begging for a quiet financial settlement, then quickly pivoted to making passive-aggressive threats about ruining my social standing in our local community, calling me a cold, heartless, and vengeful woman who had destroyed her future out of pure spite. I never dignified a single one of her attempts with a response. I calmly blocked her phone number, restricted her access across every digital platform, and permanently severed any path she could use to reach me, completely eliminating her toxic energy from my reality. Naturally, a quiet wave of local gossip swept through distant family circles and old mutual acquaintances following the news of Eric's passing and the sudden reading of his voided will. A few misinformed individuals, relying entirely on the fabricated narratives Eric had peddled during his final months, quietly took his side. They whispered behind closed doors that I had been a cold, distant, an unyielding wife, who had practically driven her poor husband into the arms of another woman, alleging that I cared far more about real estate portfolios and bank balances than I ever did about my dying spouse. They eagerly digested the tragic victim story Eric had crafted, intentionally ignoring 32 years of my unblemished loyalty, my silent sacrifices, and his complete financial freeloading. I never wasted a single second trying to correct or convince any of them. I have learned through decades of experience that people who thrive on petty drama and juicy gossip are rarely interested in objective truth, they merely want an entertaining story to circulate. I knew that my certified legal documents, my ironclad bank statements, and my lived truth were the only validations that mattered, and I owed no one a public explanation or defense of my boundaries. Sydney remained an immovable pillar of strength by my side through every uncomfortable interaction and lingering rumor. She spent countless quiet evenings at my home, reminding me that true personal peace doesn't come from seeking approval from misinformed outsiders. It comes from having the courage to protect your own life and honoring the relentless work you put into building your own security. With the estate proceedings officially concluded and all external noise silenced, I turned my full attention back toward my career, my properties, and my personal renewal. I spent my weekends visiting each of my 6 residential homes, coordinating routine maintenance, updating the landscaping, and quietly savoring the profound reality that every brick, every garden, and every piece of equity belonged exclusively to me. There were no hidden loopholes left to worry about, no shared legal titles to manage, and no entitled, deceitful partner lurking in the background waiting to take credit for my hard-earned success. I refined my commercial investment portfolio, automated my property management systems, and finally began fully enjoying the substantial passive income one had spent over 30 years cultivating. For the first time in my life, I traveled entirely on my own terms, treated myself to long overdue luxuries I had previously set aside, and lived without the constant burden of budgeting around someone else's irresponsible spending habits, secret credit cards, or hidden romantic flings. I also took time to reflect deeply on the decade I spent quietly gathering evidence, patiently biding my time instead of exploding into an emotional, chaotic confrontation the moment I discovered the affair. Many outsiders might view my calculated silence as cold or unnervingly precise, but I view it as the ultimate form of strategic self-preservation. Society routinely conditions women to react with immediate emotional volatility, to scream, fight, and create public spectacles, often compromising their legal and financial standing in the heat of anger for the sake of immediate emotional release. I intentionally chose a different path. I chose to prioritize my long-term future, my financial safety, and my personal dignity over temporary emotional drama. Eric had spent his entire adult life taking my unwavering stability for granted. He foolishly assumed that my calm, patient demeanor was a sign of naivety, that my quiet discipline meant I was easily manipulated, and that the vast wealth I built through my trust and corporate career was somehow community property he was free to distribute as he saw fit. His ultimate, fatal error was drastically underestimating the quiet, determined woman who had funded every single comfort he enjoyed. When people ask me today if I harbor any lingering guilt or regret over how his final moments played out in that hospital room, I answer them with absolute, unshakable honesty every single time. I deeply regret that he wasted 32 years of a comfortable, secure life on foolish lies. I regret that he threw away a devoted, hard-working wife for a shallow, transactional infatuation. And I regret that he chose greed, deceit, and entitlement over basic human decency and honesty. However, I do not regret protecting what was rightfully mine for a single second. I do not regret speaking the undeniable truth that stripped him of his grand delusions right before he passed. And I certainly do not regret taking every necessary step to secure my own future. Today, I live my life with complete peace, independence, and an unbothered heart. I manage my real estate assets with pride, surround myself exclusively with authentic, trustworthy people, and move through the world with a profound confidence I never possessed during my marriage. I no longer compromise my strict boundaries for anyone. I no longer downplay my immense financial success to make fragile minds feel comfortable. And I will never again tolerate anyone who attempts to mistake my kindness for weakness, or exploit my hard work. This journey was never about seeking petty revenge. It was about the quiet, undeniable triumph of a woman who built her empire entirely on her own, endured betrayal with silent poise, and chose intelligent, long-term self-protection over short-term chaos. No one should ever be allowed to spend decades leeching off your relentless effort, disrespecting your loyalty, and trying to steal your peace, only to turn around and attempt to hand your life's work over to a stranger. If you ever find yourself trapped in a relationship where you are carrying all the financial weight, doing all the emotional heavy lifting, and enduring disrespect in silence, let my story serve as a permanent reminder. Document every single detail, protect your legal assets without compromise, and never allow anyone to mistake your quiet patience for weakness. Your peace, your success, and your future will always be worth fighting for, protecting, and defending at all costs.